at this fine couple. How on a day?
I told you not to wear this dress. You think you can just disobey me like that?
The night I heard screaming from the most perfect house on our street, I dropped my pot of egusi soup, grabbed the wall for balance and whispered, "God, what is happening in that house?" Let me take you back. My name is Daniela. I live in a modest 2-bedroom flat in Lekki Phase 2, Lagos. Not the rich part, the part where the roads are still bad, but the neighbors have big cars and bigger egos. I am a primary school teacher. My husband, Kenny, is a mechanic who is trying. We are not poor, but we are not comfortable either. We are the kind of family that prays hard at the beginning of every month and counts days at the end of it. Now, right next door to us lived the Bensons, Fred Benson and his wife Doris. If you had seen them, you would have understood why I envied them. Fred drove a black Lexus LX 570. Doris drove a white Prado. Every Sunday morning, they walked out of their house like they were being photographed. Him in his agbada, her in her Ankara that was always perfectly tailored, always matching, always expensive. Their 2 children were neat and quiet. Their compound was painted fresh every year. Their generator never went off. But it was the way Fred treated Doris in public that killed me slowly inside. He opened car doors for her. He held her hand during church procession. He bought her flowers, actual flowers, and posted them on Instagram with captions like 20 years and she still makes my heart race. My queen, my home. That post got over 4,000 likes. Our pastor shared it. Women in our WhatsApp group cried over it. I cried over it too, but not from joy. I cried because my own husband, Kenny, had never once posted anything about me. Not once. He didn't even have Instagram. He came home smelling of engine oil, ate his food, watched football, and slept. He was a good man, I knew that. But good and romantic are 2 different languages, and Kenny only spoke one of them. So every time I saw Doris, something bitter rose in my chest. I smiled at her. I brought her akara on Saturday mornings. I borrowed her Tupperware and returned it clean. But inside, I was eating myself alive with envy. I wanted what she had. The love, the security, the public adoration. I used to kneel by my bed at night and ask God, why did you give her that kind of husband and give me Kenny? I am not proud of that prayer, but it is the truth. And then, slowly, quietly, the way rot begins under a beautiful surface, things started to shift. It started with a sound, a door slamming, then silence. Then 3 nights later, I heard crying through the thin wall that separated our compound from theirs. Low, muffled crying, the kind a woman does when she has practiced hiding pain so long she cries quietly even when she thinks no one can hear. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. The first real sign came on a Tuesday. I remember it clearly because it was the day NEPA took light at 6 a.m. and didn't bring it back until midnight. I was outside in the compound, fanning myself and watching my pepper dry in the sun when Doris's gate opened and she stepped out. She was not her usual self. No makeup, hair not done. She was wearing a loose boo-boo that swallowed her frame, and she had on flat rubber slippers, not the designer ones she always wore. Her eyes were behind big sunglasses, but even the sunglasses couldn't hide the stiffness in her jaw, the way she held her shoulders like she was protecting her own chest. "Doris," I called out. "Good morning, dear." She turned and smiled, but the smile didn't reach past her cheeks. "Daniela, good morning." Her voice was thin, tired. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said. "Just going to the pharmacy." That was it. She walked to her car, reversed slowly, and left. I stood there looking at the gate long after it closed. Something inside me, that quiet female instinct that never lies, whispered, "She is not fine." But I pushed it away. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself maybe she just had a headache. Maybe she was tired. Rich women get tired too, right? Then came the second sign, 2 weeks later. I was in my kitchen at about 10 p.m. warming leftover jollof rice for Kenny when I heard voices from the Benson side. A man's voice, low, controlled but sharp. The way a man speaks when he's angry but doesn't want the neighbors to hear. I turned off my gas and stood still. I couldn't hear the words clearly, only the tone, and the tone was dangerous. It had that cold quality, not hot rage, but something worse, something deliberate. Then I heard Doris's voice. She wasn't shouting, she was pleading. I pressed my ear gently against the kitchen wall. I am not proud of this either, but something in her voice made my stomach tight. I already said I'm sorry, please. The children are sleeping. His response was inaudible, but hers came back broken. I won't do it again. I promise. Fred, please. Then silence. The kind of silence that is louder than noise. I stepped back from the wall. My hands were trembling. Kenny walked into the kitchen, saw my face and said, "Babe, what happened? You look like you saw a ghost." I looked at him, my engine oil husband, my football-watching, non-Instagram husband, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. I was relieved he was boring. I was relieved he was safe. But I still didn't know the full story, not yet. The full story came 3 weeks later, and it did not come quietly. Now this is the part that broke something inside me. Fred Benson was not just a husband and a businessman. He was a deacon at Revival Fire Ministry, the big church on Admiralty Way that had 3 branches and a pastor who wore designer shoes. Fred was on the welcome committee. He gave announcements. He prayed for other people's marriages during couples retreats. He once stood at the altar during a marriage seminar and said, and I quote, "A man who truly loves God will never raise his hand against his wife." The whole congregation clapped. Doris sat in the front row and clapped too. I remember watching her clap and thinking how beautiful she looked in her cream lace, how perfect they looked together, how I whispered to Kenny, "See how Fred loves his wife. Can you not learn something?" Kenny just hissed quietly and kept looking at the program booklet. But here's what I didn't know. My friend Sandra, who did hair in the salon 2 streets from our estate, she knew Doris's house help, a young girl named Blessing. And Blessing had been quietly carrying a secret that was too heavy for her young shoulders. Sandra called me on a Thursday evening, her voice low like she was reporting something from enemy territory. "Daniela, I don't know if I should tell you this." "Tell me what?" "That's your neighbor, that Doris woman you always say you envy." My chest tightened. "What about her?" "Blessing told me that Fred has been beating that woman since before their last child was born. Not slapping, beating. She said one time he broke her wrist and they told the hospital she fell down the stairs. She said Doris has a bag hidden under the bed, a bag already packed, but she never leaves because Fred told her if she ever tries to leave, he will use his connections to take the children and destroy her reputation." The phone nearly fell from my hand. "Sandra, are you serious?" "I'm telling you what Blessing told me with her own mouth. And Blessing said the worst part is, Fred's pastor knows. The pastor has been counseling them privately, but the pastor told Doris that God hates divorce and that she needs to pray more and submit better and the violence will stop." I sat down on my kitchen floor. Just sat down, right there on the cold tiles. The pastor knew. The same pastor who posted their anniversary photo on the church's Facebook page with the caption, "A godly home is a testimony. Celebrate the Bensons." That post had 700 comments, all fire emojis and praise. I felt sick, physically sick. If this story is already moving you, if you feel it in your chest, subscribe, because the best part of this story is still coming and you don't want to miss what happens next. 3 days after Sandra's phone call, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Doris, about the packed bag under the bed, about her clapping in church while her wrist was still healing from the last time, about her sunglasses on a cloudy Tuesday morning. I thought about all the times I had looked at her life and felt small about my own. All the times I had whispered bitter prayers, asking God why He hadn't given me what she had. And now I understood. I had been envying a prison, a beautiful, well-decorated, Instagram-perfect prison. It was a Friday night, around 11:30 p.m. Kenny was already asleep. I was in the sitting room pretending to watch a Nollywood movie, but really just staring at the screen. The estate was quiet. Even the dogs had stopped barking. Then I heard it. A crash, then another one, then Doris screaming. Not crying, not pleading, screaming. The kind of scream a woman releases when she has finally run out of quiet. I jumped up. I ran to my window and looked out. The lights were on in the Benson house. I could see shadows moving violently behind the curtain. Then their front door burst open. Doris ran out into the compound in her nightgown, barefoot, her hair wild, her lip bleeding. She was holding one of her children, the younger one, a boy of about 5, pressed against her chest. Fred came out behind her. He was in a singlet and trousers, and his face was something I had never seen on him before. Not the deacon face, not the Instagram husband face, something ugly and twisted that had always been hiding underneath. "Come back inside this house," he hissed. "Don't embarrass me in front of these people." "There is nobody outside," she screamed back. "There is nobody. You have been doing this for 7 years, Fred. 7 years." I was already at my door. I didn't think, I just moved. I grabbed my wrapper, tied it fast, and walked out of my flat and into the compound. A few other neighbors were already coming out. Mama Tunde from the ground floor, Mr. Folabi from the back flat, even old Yarisi, who never came out at night. Fred saw us and his whole face changed. The ugliness tried to hide again. He put on a smile, that smooth, practiced smile, and said, "Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the noise. It's just a small misunderstanding. We are fine." But Doris turned to us, blood on her lip, child on her hip, and said, slowly, clearly, like a woman who had rehearsed this moment for 7 years, "We are not fine, and I am not going back inside that house tonight." The compound went completely silent. Even Fred went still. And in that silence, I walked forward, stood beside Doris, and said, "You don't have to." That night changed everything. Doris and her 2 children slept in my flat. I gave her my bedroom, and Kenny and I took the sitting room without a second thought. Kenny, my quiet, engine oil, no Instagram husband, got up at midnight and made tea for Doris without anyone asking him to. He didn't say much. He just set the cup beside her, patted her shoulder once, and went back to the couch. I watched him do that, and something in my chest cracked open in the most beautiful way. The next morning, Doris told me everything. 7 years of it. She started soft, her voice barely above a whisper, but the more she talked, the steadier she became, like someone draining poison from a wound that had been sealed for too long. Fred had started during her first pregnancy, just a slap, then an apology and flowers, then another slap, then a punch, then a broken plate, then a broken wrist. The pattern had a rhythm to it: violence, remorse, gifts, peace, then violence again. He always bought her something expensive afterward. That was how she had gotten the Prado. "My mother knew," Doris said, staring into her tea. "I told her 3 years ago.
She told me to manage. She said every marriage has its own cross. She said I should pray and stop provoking him. Her voice didn't break when she said it. It had moved past breaking. It was just flat, like a road after a flood has passed. "And the pastor?" I asked carefully. She looked at me with tired eyes. "Pastor Charles told me that if I leave, I will lose my anointing. He said Fred is under spiritual attack and I am his covering. He said my submission is what will heal him." She paused. "He said this 6 months after Fred put me in the hospital." I had to hold my own hands together under the table to stop myself from saying something I would regret about Pastor Charles. But here is where God showed up, because God always shows up, even when people fail. Sandra, my salon friend, had quietly done something the night before. When I texted her that Doris was at my flat, she had forwarded Blessing's testimony to a woman in our estate WhatsApp group, a woman named Mrs. Cocker, who most people didn't know was a lawyer specializing in domestic violence cases. By 9 a.m. that Saturday, Mrs. Cocker was sitting in my living room with a notepad, 2 printed forms, and the quiet authority of a woman who had done this many times before. By noon, Doris had a statement documented. By 3 p.m., Fred had been visited by 2 police officers who lived on the next street and were friends with Mr. Afolabi. By evening, the story had moved beyond our estate. Fred's carefully constructed world, the deacon title, the anniversary post, the marriage seminar speeches began to crack publicly, loudly and permanently. His pastor called him, then called Doris to ask her to consider the church's image. Doris handed the phone to Mrs. Cocker, who introduced herself and explained what the words accessory to concealment meant in a court of law. Pastor Charles did not call back. 6 months have passed since that Friday night. Doris is no longer my neighbor. She moved out of the Benson house and is now renting a flat in Bagada with her 2 children. She got a job at a logistics company. Her degree in business administration hadn't disappeared just because Fred told her she didn't need to work. She cut her hair short. She wears flat shoes now, not because she can't afford heels, but because she says flat shoes remind her that she is standing on her own ground. Fred's case is still in court. His lawyer is trying to settle quietly. Doris's lawyer, Mrs. Cocker, is not interested in quiet. The church removed Fred from deacon, but they also quietly transferred Pastor Charles to the Abuja branch instead of addressing what he had done. Some battles take longer, but those battles are also being fought. And me? I sat Kenny down one Saturday evening after the children on our street had gone inside and the compound was quiet, and I told him everything. About the envy, about the prayers I had prayed comparing him to Fred, about all the times I had looked at Doris's life and felt like mine wasn't enough. Kenny listened without interrupting. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Daniela, I know I'm not perfect. I know I don't post on Instagram or buy you flowers. But I want you to know, I have never, not one day, looked at you like you are something I owned. You are my wife, not my property." I didn't cry. I was done crying over things that didn't deserve my tears. Instead, I leaned my head on his shoulder, his strong, engine oil-scented shoulder. And I thought about all the women still inside their beautiful prisons, smiling for Instagram, clapping in church, hiding their packed bags under beds, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to stand beside them and say, "You don't have to go back inside." If you are that woman, or if you know that woman, this story was not an accident in your timeline today. Sometimes God uses the most ordinary neighbor in a modest flat with a boring husband and a pot of egusi soup to be the person who changes everything. The house next door was never perfect. It was just well painted. And now, Doris is finally building something real, with her own hands, on her own ground, in her own name.
That is what a perfect life actually looks like. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, share it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Every week, we tell the stories like this. See you in the next one.